Max was sure he'd hit rock bottom. It wasn't the cosmic storm that sent his ship spiraling toward an uncharted planet, or the crash that left him bruised and battered in the wreckage. It wasn't even the lack of communication or backup. It was the eerie silence that greeted him after he stumbled out of his smoking ship, dragging his broken limbs in search of safety. The planet was beautiful, too beautiful, almost. The air was crisp, the sky was a flawless shade of blue, and the ground beneath his feet was covered with bright, exotic plants that looked like something out of a botanical dream. Yet there was no sign of life. No animals scurrying, no insects buzzing, no distant sounds of civilization. Max felt a shiver run down his spine, more from the unsettling stillness than from the pain in his ribs. Stumbling forward, Max spotted something that might have been a building in the distance. Or maybe it was just his exhaustion playing tricks on him. Either way, he wasn't about to turn around and face the wreckage. He had to find help. As he hobbled forward, his mind raced. The ship was toast, he knew that much. All his communications equipment had been fried in the crash, and he'd lost his only emergency beacon. He was stranded. Alone. Or so he thought. He didn't hear them coming. One moment, he was limping through the alien landscape, and the next, he was surrounded. Out of nowhere, a group of tall alien women appeared, their movements fluid and graceful, their skin shimmering in the light. They had an otherworldly beauty, all was sharp, symmetrical features and eyes that glowed faintly like twin moons. Their clothing was elaborate, flowing fabrics that draped over their forms in ways that seemed both regal and mysterious. They looked like royalty, and in many ways they were. They weren't just the first living beings Max had seen in hours. They were the first living beings he'd ever seen who were nothing like humans. Max froze. The women didn't move closer, but they were watching him. Observing. Studying him. Great, he thought. Maybe I'm not alone, but I'm sure as hell in the middle of some kind of cultural exchange nightmare. His first instinct was to introduce himself, maybe even apologize for the crash. But he had no idea how to approach beings this alien. His mind was foggy from the crash, and the last thing he needed was to accidentally offend the first creatures he met on this planet. The silence stretched on, tense, heavy. Finally, one of the women stepped forward. She had the most striking violet eyes, the color of distant stars, and her voice, when it came, was melodious but with an edge of curiosity. "You are human," she said, as if stating a fact. She didn't ask, didn't wait for Max to respond. The way she said it made it clear that she already knew the answer. Max blinked, his throat dry. Yes. I am. Max Jordan. I crash-landed here." The woman tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing with intrigue. "Crash-landed?" She spoke the words as though they were foreign, as if she didn't fully understand them. "You have come from the stars?" "Yeah, that's right. Look, I'm stranded here. I need help. Can you?" Her lips curled into what could have been a smile, but it was more like the kind of look someone might give an intriguing but puzzling science experiment. "We have read of your kind," she said. "The human species. We have studied your customs." Max frowned. "Studied my customs? How?" "From your communications," she explained. "We have researched your history, your ways, your relationships." She hesitated slightly on the last word, as if testing it out. "We find your romantic customs fascinating." Max blinked, completely thrown off by the shift in tone. Wait. You've been studying human relationships? How do you even, like love and stuff?" "Love," she repeated, and this time, the words seemed to hold an entirely different weight. She leaned closer, her eyes never leaving his. "Yes. Love. And the physical connections that accompany it. We have never interacted with men." Max froze again, realizing the implications of what she said. These women, these alien beings, had no idea what human relationships were like, no clue what being intimate, physical, or emotional with another being meant. They were, apparently, obsessed with it, studying it as if it were some abstract concept, but they had never actually experienced it. And now, here he was, a stranded human male with absolutely no idea what the hell he was supposed to do. Wait, so? Max tried, still a little dazed from the crash and the strange turn of events. You mean to tell me that all of you, never been with a guy? He had to swallow a laugh, because the idea was too absurd. This whole planet could be a giant test of his sanity. She nodded solemnly, as if this fact was an integral part of their existence. No. We are unexperienced, she said, the word heavy in her alien accent. Max blinked, trying to process the situation. His mind raced. He had been through a lot over the last few hours, fighting gravity, being thrown around by a space storm, the crash, but this was something else entirely. He had to be careful here, tread lightly. There was no telling what these women might think or expect from him. He swallowed, unsure if he should laugh or cry. So, what's the deal with all this? He gestured at the group, now starting to circle him. We wish to understand, the violet-eyed woman said. To learn from you. Your experiences. Max's eyebrows shot up. You're kidding, right? You want me to teach you about relationships? How to date? The woman did not seem offended. In fact, she seemed pleased. Yes. We have read all the books, watched the communications from your world. But none of us have ever participated. Max was starting to feel like he had walked into some sort of intergalactic version of The Bachelor, except the stakes were way more confusing, and none of these women seemed to know what they were doing. They didn't even have the basic understanding of attraction, romance, or, he guessed, basic human interaction. Okay, he muttered, holding up his hands in a defensive gesture. So, what do you want me to teach you? Like how to kiss? How to… He froze as he realized where this conversation was going. They were completely clueless. You could begin with the basics, the violet-eyed woman said, her tone hopeful. Max realized, with a creeping sense of dread, that he was being set up as some sort of alien relationship expert. And to make matters worse, these alien women weren't just curious, they were eager. Too eager. This was either going to be the easiest job of his life, or the biggest disaster of his career. Max wasn't sure whether he should laugh or scream when he realized the alien women were actually taking him seriously. He hadn't meant to sign up for a romantic expert gig on a foreign planet, but here he was, stuck in a place where the inhabitants didn't know a damn thing about sex or relationships. And they expected him to teach them. He rubbed his forehead, trying to shake off the absurdity of it all. He had no idea how to teach these women about human relationships. Hell, he could barely figure out his own love life back home. He wasn't a relationship guru. He was just a regular guy who'd had his share of awkward dates and missed signals. But he couldn't exactly tell them that, could he? Well, where do I start? Max finally asked, rubbing his hands together nervously. I mean, you guys don't know anything about, human romance? The violet-eyed woman gave him a solemn nod. Correct. We have studied only the theoretical aspects. We wish to learn, practically. Max swallowed hard, trying to keep his voice steady. Okay, well, I guess we can start with something simple. Like, kissing? The women seemed intrigued by the word. Kissing? One of them repeated, clearly savoring the sound of it. We have read that kissing is important in human interaction. Max fought the urge to groan. Of course they had read about it. Theoretically star. He wasn't sure how he was going to explain something as basic as kissing to beings who had no clue what it even felt like. But here he was, a one-man show for the entire planet's romantic education. Yeah, so, kissing is a way for humans to show affection. It's usually a prelude to more, Max explained, suddenly feeling way too exposed in this strange role. You know, it's about closeness, physical connection. You press your lips together and… He cut off when he saw the confused looks on their faces. It was like he was talking to a bunch of toddlers about the birds and the bees, except these women were all fully grown and intelligent. but completely lost when it came to something as simple as basic human affection. One of them, a blonde with translucent skin, stepped forward. "What do you mean by more?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "Is there more to it than just pressing your lips together?" Max opened his mouth to respond but stopped, realizing how complicated this could get. "Well, yeah, there's a lot more, actually," he said, trying to backpedal without sounding like a total idiot. "But let's keep it simple for now. We can focus on the kiss. I'll show you what it's like." He wasn't sure if he was doing the right thing, but he couldn't exactly back out now. He could already feel the weight of their gazes on him, expectant, curious, and unnervingly eager. So, with a deep breath, he leaned in slightly and pressed his lips against the blonde's cheek. It was an awkward, quick peck, but he figured it was a start. The women watched in rapt attention, their eyes wide. They didn't even flinch at the awkwardness of the moment. Max pulled back, clearing his throat. "See? It's a gesture of affection. Nothing too complicated. Just connecting." The blonde woman didn't seem satisfied. "But how does it make you feel? What is the purpose of this gesture?" Max scratched his head, unsure how to explain the complexity of human emotions. "Well, kissing can make you feel good. It's about chemistry, really. It's about mutual attraction. When you kiss someone, you get this rush of, warmth, excitement, maybe even desire. You get closer. You start to feel something for the other person. Desire," the violet-eyed woman repeated, nodding slowly as if processing the word. "Is that what we feel for you now?" Max froze. "Wait, what? You feel desire for me?" The women all nodded in unison. The blonde one smiled faintly, as though she cracked some new code. "Yes. We feel something. A strong pull. An attraction. Is this normal in your species?" Max could barely think straight, his brain spinning. This was not what he'd signed up for. He just meant to give them a quick, simple lesson on kissing, not get involved in some weird alien attraction fiasco. Well, yeah, I guess it's normal for humans to feel attracted to each other. But you guys, wait, you really don't get what I'm saying, do you?" "No," the violet-eyed woman said, her voice almost sweet. "You must teach us more. Show us more of your human ways." Max cursed under his breath. This was getting out of hand, and fast. But how could he back out? These women clearly needed help, even if they didn't understand the first thing about romance or human relationships. And somehow, Max had become their teacher, whether he liked it or not. Okay, Max said, trying to keep his voice steady despite the rising panic inside him. "I'll explain some more, but you need to understand that this is a gradual thing. It's not something you can rush into, alright?" The women nodded, eagerly hanging on his every word. "Gradual," one of them repeated, and the way she said it made it sound like she was ready to take notes. Max wished he could be more confident, but he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep up the act. "So, after kissing," he began cautiously, "there are other things. More intimate things. But before we get to that, there's something you need to know. You have to make sure both people feel comfortable. You can't just force things. It's about trust. Consent. Understanding each other's boundaries." The women exchanged confused looks. "Boundaries?" they asked in unison, as if they were trying to figure out some new alien word. "Yeah, boundaries. It means that each person has limits, things they're okay with and things they're not. You've got to respect that. It's important, especially if you want to build any kind of relationship, whether it's romantic or just personal." They stared at him for a long moment, as if they were absorbing the concept of boundaries, as if it were some newly discovered law of the universe. Max could see the wheels turning in their heads, but he couldn't tell if they actually understood what he was saying. One of the women cleared her throat. "We understand," she said, her voice soft and sincere. "But what about the physical connection? The act of bonding?" Max's eyes widened, and his face went red. "Wait, are you asking about sex?" The violet-eyed woman smiled, though it wasn't exactly reassuring. Yes, we wish to understand it fully. You seem to consider it an important part of human bonding. Max didn't know whether to laugh or run screaming into the alien wilderness. These women were completely unprepared for what they were asking. They weren't even asking about the mechanics of sex. They were asking about everything that led up to it, and Max was the poor bastard who had to be their guide. You know what? Max muttered, rubbing his temples. Maybe I need a break. But deep down, he knew he wasn't going to get one. The only way out of this mess was to somehow finish what he'd started. Max was starting to feel like he was stuck in the world's weirdest, most unintentional sex ed class. He wasn't a sex therapist, a teacher, or even remotely qualified for what these alien women were expecting of him. But somehow, he had become the resident expert on human attraction and bonding. How had this turned into his life? 1 minute, he was trying to survive a crash landing on an uncharted planet. The next, he was explaining the intricacies of human intimacy to a bunch of extraterrestrial women who couldn't even grasp the basics. So, just to be clear, Max said, rubbing his eyes in frustration, you want to know about the physical side of human relationships? You know, like the whole sex thing? The violet-eyed woman, who had now taken the role of their leader, or perhaps their self-appointed spokeswoman, nodded, her gaze fixed on him with an intensity that was both unnerving and oddly flattering. Yes, we wish to understand it fully. You humans engage in this act for bonding? Max hesitated for a moment. Could he explain human sexuality to a group of aliens who had zero frame of reference for it? He barely figured it out himself. Yeah, we do, he said, trying to stay calm. It's kind of essential to human relationships. It's how we connect on a deeper level. The group leaned in, all eyes on him as if he were about to reveal the secrets of the universe. Max cleared his throat, trying to remember that he was just some guy who'd had a few awkward one-night stands and a handful of relationships that had ended in tears or misunderstandings. This was not what he signed up for. So, the first thing you need to know about sex is that it's, intimate. It's personal, Max said, stalling as he tried to find a way to explain this without sounding completely idiotic. It's not just physical. There's a whole emotional component to it. You do it because you want to be close to someone. You feel connected. It's about trust and mutual respect. The blonde alien, the one who had asked about kissing earlier, raised a hand. Trust, she said, speaking the word like it was an alien concept itself. Is that what makes it pleasurable? Max stared at her, wondering how to answer. He didn't exactly have a scientific breakdown of human pleasure, but the concept of trust made sense. Kind of, he said, trying to keep things simple. It's trust that makes the whole experience meaningful. Without it, it's just a physical act. It won't feel the same. There's a mental and emotional connection that happens. It's not all just instinct. It's about the bond you share with someone. The violet-eyed woman looked at him thoughtfully. So, bonding is what creates the desire to engage in this physical act? How do you know if you are ready? Max blinked. The question felt too real, like she was digging into the heart of what relationships really were. Well, there's no one-size-fits-all answer, he said slowly. It's not like flipping a switch. You just know. You feel it. If you're both ready, emotionally and physically, then that's when you go for it. He was still trying to wrap his mind around what was happening. These women had literally no idea what it was like to be with a man. It was like they were trying to learn the art of something that Max himself wasn't sure he'd mastered. But they were curious, insatiably so, and Max didn't know whether to feel flattered or terrified. I see, said another woman, her expression still unreadable. But what of pleasure? Is it always enjoyable for humans? Max tried not to blush. Of course, they were asking about pleasure. But he knew this question was inevitable, given how much they were dissecting every aspect of human interaction. For humans, yeah, he said, trying to keep it casual. Pleasure is part of it. It's a way for both partners to feel good, to feel connected. It's about physical sensations, but also about the emotional connection. If you're with someone you trust, it feels better. And it's supposed to be fun. The group of women exchanged glances, a little more relaxed now that they seemed to understand the basics. Max wondered if they were starting to wrap their heads around the whole thing, or if he was about to end up in an intergalactic scandal. The last thing he needed was to get arrested by some alien authorities for teaching these women how to enjoy themselves. You said it's about trust, the blonde alien continued, her voice soft but insistent. What happens if trust is broken? Can the bond still remain? Max felt a weight settle in his stomach at that question. It was one of the hardest things to explain, because trust wasn't something that could be easily rebuilt once it was lost. But the reality was, people often did try. Well, breaking trust is difficult, he said slowly. It can cause a lot of pain. And sometimes the bond can't be repaired. But sometimes people work through it. They rebuild it, piece by piece. It's not easy, though. The blonde woman nodded as if she were taking mental notes. Max wondered if he had actually just given her some deep wisdom, or if she had just added, broken trust, to her growing list of things to explore. Either way, he was certain that this was one lesson he hadn't expected to teach. So you're saying, the violet-eyed woman said, that human relationships can be fragile? That they require constant care? Max hesitated for a moment. Yeah, they can be fragile. But relationships, real relationships, are about working together. About putting effort into understanding each other. The connection is everything. If you stop caring, or if you don't make time for each other, that's when things fall apart. And it can happen fast. Fascinating, the violet-eyed woman said, nodding. You have spoken of effort and understanding as key components of human bonding. What happens when one partner does not put in the effort? Does the relationship end? Max took a deep breath. This was the tricky part. Not necessarily, he said. Sometimes, people take each other for granted, or they get distracted, but it's possible for the relationship to survive if both people are willing to try. It's about communication. If you talk through things, you can usually work them out. The women seemed to accept this answer, though Max wasn't entirely sure they fully understood it. The idea that relationships were work wasn't something that seemed to have crossed their minds. To them, relationships seemed to be more of an intellectual pursuit, something to be studied and analyzed, not lived and experienced. I think I'm starting to get it, the blonde woman said slowly, her voice thoughtful. Relationships are not just about pleasure or physical connection. It is about effort, trust, and communication. Max nodded, relieved that they seemed to be grasping at least part of the concept. Exactly. And that's the foundation of any strong bond. But there's still a lot more to it. It's not always easy. Sometimes it's messy. But when it works, it's worth it. He didn't know if his explanation had truly sunk in. For all he knew, these women might take this newfound understanding of human relationships and immediately go out and try to apply it to some random unsuspecting guy from their planet. But at least for now, he felt like he had managed to get through the basics without making a complete fool of himself. He glanced around at their curious faces and wondered just how much he had taught them. He could only hope that they wouldn't try to experiment on some unsuspecting alien male once they had fully understood what he'd said. Max felt like his head was spinning, and not in the good way. The last few hours had been an avalanche of questions about human intimacy, each one more complex than the last. He never thought his crash landing would lead to this kind of education. And now, standing before these alien women, Max had to face the inevitable, the moment where theory would meet practice. They'd already gathered enough information. They had the intellectual understanding of relationships, the emotional insight into what it took to make a connection. But there was one last thing they needed to experience, the physical aspect of human relationships. And that, Max realized, was where the real chaos would start. So, now that we've covered, kissing, trust, communication, and the like, Max rubbed the back of his neck nervously. Are you, ready to actually practice? The blonde woman stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with curiosity and something else, something he couldn't quite place. You mean now? Are we to engage in the act now? Max's pulse quickened. Well, I'm not saying you have to do anything, just that you need to understand how it feels. That's the next step in the process. You can't truly know something until you, well, experience it. The women exchanged looks. The violet-eyed one tilted her head. Experience it, but with you? Max froze. The question hung in the air, and the weight of it hit him hard. His first impulse was to deny it. To run. But that would be the coward's way out. He had to be responsible. They were looking to him for guidance. He was, for better or worse, their teacher in all things human. Well, yeah? I guess so, he said slowly, trying to mask the panic creeping into his voice. You can't really know what it feels like unless you, try it. And the whole point of this is so you can understand what you've read about, right? It's not like I'm just offering. I'm just helping you guys learn. The blonde stepped closer. You will be the subject? Her voice had dropped to a low, almost seductive tone, and it sent a shiver down Max's spine. This is how we shall experience it. Max stared at her, and his mind raced. This was a whole new level of trouble. The idea of letting them experiment with him, teaching them in a very personal way, was one thing. But the implications? He could barely wrap his head around it. Was this even ethical? Was it safe? But it was clear, these women were determined to learn, and he was, for some reason, their designated teacher. Yeah, I guess, Max said, doing his best to sound confident, even though his heart was pounding. But it's not a one-way street. You don't just receive. You give too. In relationships, it's about both people being involved. It's mutual. The violet-eyed woman nodded, her expression still unreadable. We understand. We have read the terms mutual consent, but we did not understand its true meaning until now. Max's throat went dry. He wasn't sure what they'd read or what they thought they knew, but he was starting to feel like a character in a twisted alien romance novel. So, Max said, his voice shaky but trying to sound calm. Mutual consent means that both parties are willing. You can't just do something because you feel like it. You both have to agree. Agreed, the blonde woman said. We consent. But we do not wish to make a mistake. You will guide us, yes? Max sighed. I'm guiding you, but you have to remember, this isn't something I can just show you in one go. It's gradual. It takes time. And it's important that both people are comfortable. Comfortable, she repeated, nodding slowly. Yes. We will be comfortable. Max tried to ignore the way she said it, the underlying implication that she was too eager. He wasn't sure he was ready for this, not at all. Okay. Let's just take it slow. We don't need to rush into anything major right now. The women nodded, their expressions shifting to a more serious tone. Slow, the violet-eyed woman repeated. We will follow your guidance, Max. Max didn't have much more time to process the weight of that statement before the blonde took another step toward him. She reached out slowly, her hand brushing against his arm as though testing the waters. The touch was light, but Max felt an immediate jolt of electricity course through him. Like this? She asked softly, looking up at him through long lashes. Max nodded, trying to focus. Yeah. Just like that. You know, gentle. No pressure. She smiled at him, clearly pleased with herself. Then, to his utter surprise, she leaned in and kissed him on the cheek. It was soft, tentative, and almost sweet. Max didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This was exactly what he'd been trying to explain, but now that it was happening, it felt bizarre. They were genuinely trying to experience human relationships, but this was nothing like he'd ever imagined. Well, that's a good start, Max said, his voice hoarse. But remember, this is just a kiss. We're not jumping to anything yet. The blonde looked satisfied, though there was a hint of mischief in her eyes. We understand, she said. But now we wish to try more. Max didn't know how to stop them. He couldn't just say no, they were already this far in. And to be honest, part of him was a little curious to see where this would go. He wasn't that innocent. But that didn't mean he was ready for what they were suggesting. Okay, Max said carefully. We can go a little further, but we still need to take it slow. We're exploring, remember? We're not doing this for real, not yet. They all nodded, their faces focused and intent. Max had no idea if they were really getting it, or if they just thought this was some bizarre Earth tradition. He could feel the tension in the air, the mix of excitement and confusion. One of the women stepped forward and, without warning, kissed him fully on the lips. It was soft but insistent, and for a second, Max forgot everything. His mind went blank, and he just felt the press of her lips against his. When she pulled back, she seemed pleased with the reaction. This, she said, is what you call kissing? Max had to swallow hard before he could answer. Yeah, exactly. That's the idea. But remember, it's about more than just kissing. It's about trust, respect, and mutual understanding. The violet-eyed woman nodded seriously. Trust, respect, understanding. She said the words like they were sacred mantras. Max wasn't sure if this was the beginning of something, or the beginning of the end. But all he could do now was hold on and keep guiding them, step by step. Whatever came next, he was already in it. There was no turning back.